Welcome back to the randInt podcast with Raffy and Chandra. Hooray! Oh, finally, the soundboard's
Yay!
working.
Well, I
Now,
see the
this
volume has
time
gone up on
around,
it too.
oh, geez, we are going to have issues with upload speeds. So let me just pause all uploads. So this time the roles have reversed where I am overseas and Chandra's in Australia.
Well,
Um,
well, well.
and so I'm in London at the moment. Actually, it fits in with the theme of today. We are getting political. So as of the last 24, 48 hours in London, or in the UK, I should say, the equivalent of One Nation, called the Reform Party, has won a lot of the local council elections, which bodes for
Oh,
interesting times in the UK. And around the same time as we're recording this, One Nation has won one of the by-elections in Australia. So we thought, given politics is always in the news, why don't we get political in this episode? Uh,
yay! Let's discuss politics.
yeah. Because, like, overall, you have to kind of say, it's like most people, like, politics always happens. I don't know anyone who likes politics, right? Like, most everyone I know is like, politicians suck, this, that, and the other. So, given that it just generally has a negative vibe attached to it, why do we even have it? So, thoughts, Chandra?
Well, one of the things I like is, I think it was a Wait But Why article, but people like stories and people like groups. We all like to be in our own group and have a story that sort of ties that group together. Politics kind of
Mm.
does that. Like we all get to feel like a part of this group and whatever political party or leaning you might have, there's a common story that everybody shares and agrees upon usually. So I think that's kind of one of those natural things, almost like religion. But two topics we should definitely cover: politics and religion. I hear those are the things you're supposed to talk about, right?
Well, what else can we get topical on, like gender identity and like,
Yes.
uh,
randInt, hitting all the
yeah,
latest things.
no, I mean, I agree. Like, I mean, I was thinking about, like, should we even cover it? But given that the theme of the show is how the random affects the everyday, I actually found it, like, I read this article. I unfortunately don't have it for the show notes, but because it was just too long ago and I don't even have it bookmarked anywhere. But if I can find it, I'll put it in there. Um, there was this one book or blog post, I can't remember where I found it, which was kind of saying, it's like, but after you get to that, I can't remember what the number is, but it's like 150 people, that your immediate tribe
Uh,
thing. Then after that, it
yep.
becomes like the other. So
Yeah.
once you start getting
And that's
beyond,
when
like,
stories become very important and some way of keeping the group together.
yeah. So one of the things that happens is that, you need stories, but then there was supposedly historical uh, precedent for societies that were very flat, that didn't have like a leader. Everyone was just like, they were specialized in what they did, like, hunter gatherer, blah
Uh,
blah, like tribesmen doing, I don't know, leaf products, whatever. The reason politics won out is that societies that had hierarchy like actually survived the physical violence and wars as compared to flat societies. So it turns out politicians are the output, or a leadership or hierarchy, it doesn't have to be politics, are an offshoot of actually survival bias. Like, the societies that sustained in large groups were
guess it makes
because,
sense. It's like the whole, benefit for the group versus the individual kind of thing. But if the group isn't
well,
very well organized, it seems unlikely that the group will survive very long. Another group that is very well organized might get rid of the other group.
yeah, and it's like, in the medical context, like DRABC, right? You have this, like, someone's had an arrest, you start DRABC, and it's like danger response, airway, breathing, circulation, and airway is more important than breathing because we decided that airway, oxygen going in and out. And like, well, I'm sure in another universe someone would argue that doesn't matter about the oxygen if the circulation is not, like, you could do CBA, right? But anyway, we've just universally agreed that ABC is the correct order. But no one's going to randomly make someone rest to test this out, right? Like,
It sounds like there's no randomized control trials on do parachutes work.
yeah, right. But
Very
the
hard to
point
get
of the
that through
story is,
ethics
like,
nowadays.
yeah, she should have done it in, like, the World War Ones or whatever. They had those
Yes.
paratroopers, where the, like, the zip
Back in
cord
the
just
day,
auto pulls for you. um,
for science.
that's science. But, like, the thing is, there's context for, like, if you look at patient blood management in Australia right now, right? It basically says, like, hey, if you have lots of bleeding, you need to transfuse not only red blood cells but platelets and whatnot, The exact ratios don't seem to matter, but what matters is that you have a plan. So it turns out in a whole bunch of situations in life, the random answer is like, it doesn't matter what the random plan is, but as long as you have a plan, it's better than no plan. That seems to be
If
the
you've
pattern,
thought about a
right?
plan,
Like,
that's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, as in, it's just like, it literally says this in the PVM document. Is like, there is no set thing. Like, there is no set ratio that's optimal.
It makes
Just
sense though. It's
have
kind
a
of like,
ratio.
have you thought about, do you have a way of thinking about it? Yes, that's a
Yeah,
good starting point. And I guess
yeah.
with
Which,
politics as well, same thing. It's just maybe, I'm sure there's lots of different forms of government over time, but having some sort of structure has survived the times.
yeah. So this is where I was like, oh, this is actually the perfect topic for the podcast, because if you think about it, exactly what you said, right? Politics evolved from a random bunch of rules. It's like, hey, how do we organize stuff? It's like, oh, that guy seems to like have good ideas. He's our leader, right? And so then you
Mm.
had like tribespeople with the tribal elders, right? And then it was like, no, they're so corrupt because that person is now behaving like they get everything, It's like, we should be represented. It's like, all right, but I can't be bothered reading all that stuff. Hey, Chandra, you seem like you know what you're doing. You represent me and Jimmy,
We'll
my
trust you.
friend,
Yeah,
right?
I
And
trust
then
you.
you
You
get
seem like a good bloke.
representatives. And so then it becomes like, oh, look, not everyone, like everyone votes for a representative, and that representative, like, you get like the pyramid scheme starting to happen, right? And eventually you spin that enough times based on arbitrary divisions of who's in a group that gets to represent. Like, maybe it's 10 people per representative. Someone goes like geographical area, which is kind of like the Australian system, right? So there's all these arbitrary and totally random groupings that go into making up the political system across the world, right? There is no, like, like now,
One way
like,
to do it. And
yeah,
even the rules of how you make those groupings keep changing.
yeah,
And
yeah,
sometimes that becomes part of the game. How do you
yeah,
how do you change the grouping to win? Because everybody wants to win. And
yeah. I think it's called
more than
gerrymandering or
maybe,
something, like
yeah. I
where
think the US is big on that. I don't know if
yeah.
Australia
Oh,
does
I
that.
mean,
I'm not sure.
now
I don't
Australia
really
does it
hear
too,
about it.
but
Okay.
it does it to a lesser extent, but it does do it. But and you have to justify it based on like why you think. So it can't just be because I felt like it. It has to be like
Because
population
I'll
growth has
win more
happened.
often.
Yeah, so it's like they try to, like, I'm sure there's a lot of it is like, we want to win more often, but there's a little bit of a sheer of like there's a little layer of having to be pragmatic, right?
Okay.
But anyway, so but there's all like the biggest thing was like for me, like looking into this, was that it is arbitrary random stories, right? That have built up over
Mm,
time and a bunch of rules. These are not laws of physics, right? And you
no.
spin that enough times and you end up with the world we have, where I would say the Westminster system, so that was started in the UK, which is kind of like an offshoot of the Greek system of having the Senate and division of power and all that stuff, which the US has in a slightly different format, Australia has in a slightly different format. So that format, and like, constitutional monarchy sort of thing, and obviously the US went very much against that. Like,
So it
this
does
is
sound
all
like they've gone
same,
back
but
to the monarchy setup.
no, what are you talking about? There no kings. No kings
Mm-mm-mm.
is just like their brand of politics. There's no kings.
Yes,
There's
yes,
only one.
definitely.
Yeah,
One king.
just yeah, yeah, one king. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, you get to this system where you have like, the political right versus left and whatnot. And my favorite thing about this all is that Australia, you have Labor versus the Liberals, but the Liberals are actually conservative.
Yeah, I get very confused because there's a lot of this right versus left, conservative
Yeah.
versus not, and Labor liberal things, and I'm like, wait, which one's which again? Like,
What
it's
is this
very
the mislabeling?
confusing.
It's like it's like, in the US there's like the Democrats, right? And the Republicans, right? And
Mm.
which I'm like, I don't know what that means, but currently the Republicans seem to be undermining what it means to be a republic. They should be called the monarchists, right? Like, I'm like, maybe like they should just speak to like brand names instead of like, instead of it being Labor, it's like Albanese's like fun party or something, like, like, or like, how
I always see, like, in
there's
Australia, you get the very clearly labeled parties, like the "We Are for Pot" party. I'm like, great, I know what you're for. Very clear.
no. So okay, Australian
Oh
law is
no, do they
actually,
sneak stuff in as well? Damn it.
yes. So there is so
Sneaky,
currently
sneaky.
there's a big thing happening where one of the it's like a one of those online influencers. He's a political agitator, so he's going to register two political parties because they don't have to represent what it says. One is so there's like a so the ones I know
Oh,
about
there was
there's
about
two.
one
It's
about
like
vaccines as well, I remember.
there's a vaccines one, but they don't have to be accurately labeled. So there's a pro-Israeli person who's about to register the pro-Palestinian party and then divert the
Oh.
votes to yeah. And then
That seems
I think I
slightly
heard
evil.
like there's like a Muslim group called Muslim Votes Matter, and it's meant to like be for representation. So someone is registering them as a political party to divert it to like the Islamophobic, like right wing channels, because there is no
Oh.
campaign law to say that the party's name has to do anything. Like you can register any party name to any cause, and it doesn't have to match, and you don't have to say what you're gonna do. You can say that's the name. But they're trying to. I mean, it's like if it leads to laws that actually say, hey, you have to say what it says on the tin, I'm all for it. But yeah, so there isn't like the reason the names don't have to match, and probably the reason for the confusion is like yeah, like not by design, by the lack of any sort of meaningful um, requirement for labeling. But also, I think there's been political drift between right versus left. So like right used to be more conservative. I mean, I don't
Mm.
know the ins and outs of politics, so take everything with a little asterisk of salt here, dear listeners. We're not political like I don't know that much about it. But it's kind of like right wing stuff is more like conservative, small government, less intervention, safety nets. Look, just have the bare minimum. Whereas left is more socialist, collective good, government interventions, yada yada. Right. But the right versus left supposedly is like breaking down in terms of like you go left far enough, you turn right, and you go right far enough, you turn left. There is like this, it's almost like a
Mm.
circle instead of like a straight thing where they almost do the same thing in slightly different formats, which I would say like I didn't initially believe, but then you look at the last few years and you're like, yeah, it's kind of true because on the left, it's kind of
There's also
like,
that thing about like small government was one of the things that I believe some groups like, and that's kind of changed now. Like, let's have more
well, I
rules on
mean, yeah,
things.
so historically, the right is more the small government and all that stuff, right? But then you look at the last rightish government, if you think of it in Australia, that increased the number of like public roles and this, that, and the other. It just so there was like all this political nepotism supposedly that happened. And I don't know the ins and outs of it. Like we're also growing as a population, so like maybe you just need more people to do the stuff, right? Like I don't know. But so the historic right versus left and what that means seems to be uh, breaking down, or at least needing to be redefined in other ways, because the actual landscapes of the way the old groupings used to be, like you said, like there's like different tribes, right? But it doesn't describe a tribe anymore. Like,
Yeah.
so there seems to be like and it seems to be not just Australia, but everywhere you look, there's a rise in populism, which
Hmm.
again, I don't know the very big
Don't
definition of
know
it,
what the
but it's kind of
meaning of
like,
that is.
no, I don't know. It's like, let's ask Claude right now. Actually, that would be a
Mm.
very good segue to. Uh, but yeah, do you have any
Well,
thoughts on this while I look this up?
yeah, well, since we made that segue, obviously slightly on a side tangent, the other one that since you're in England, I remember is Count Binface. Count Binface as a ran for the
Oh,
London mayor. There's a guy with a bin on his head, and he did surprisingly quite well. He was, I believe, the top of the independents, and then he sort of formed his own party, which was the Count Binface Party. But actually, did really well. Had some interesting policies, like build at least one social house, and get the people managing the River Thames to swim in the River Thames. I was like, sounds sensible. Uh,
yeah, and then there would be a very low amount of people managing the River Thames.
yeah, I can see how that would help you manage the River Thames a little better if you had to swim in it. You
Well,
might
no,
actually
because then you'd
care.
have to fish their bodies out of the River
This is
Thames.
also true. Well, that would be called fiscal responsibility. He's saving the government money.
So populism definition. political style or logic that frames society as split between two homogeneous groups, a virtuous pure people versus a corrupt elite, and claims politics should express the unmediated will of the former. So basically, it's anti-elite, anti-establishment rhetoric, usually has a charismatic leader claiming direct connection to the real people, hostility to intermediating institutions, courts, press, civil rights, civil service expert bodies, framed as obstacle to popular will, moral, not just political. Opponents aren't wrong; they're illegitimate. Thin ideology. It bolts onto host ideology, left or right, rather than standing alone. Uh, yeah.
Sounds
Okay.
complicated.
No, no. I mean, I think it basically just says like, hey, the system doesn't work. Um, the people want this, and I represent the people. Which,
So
yeah,
count
I
bin face.
suppose, huh?
So count face.
Yeah, account bin based. Like, I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, fair enough. And it's structural things is like, tries to weaken the checks and balances because those are repressing the people,
Maybe not
replaces
count bin
pluralism.
face
Like,
then, but yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's
Change the
like,
system, vote.
yeah. So, but I think there is a global rise in populism because I think, again, the coming back to we were talking about the definition of right, left, and all that, that's kind of breaking down. So if you vote for left or right, I don't think they fully capture the current climate. Like, historically, it's been like pro capitalism, pro government sort of stuff, right? Like, one's like companies do the best good and capitalism solves everything, and the others are like unregulated stuff means that you're taking profit over people and you need to unionize, yada yada, right? So
Only
that's been the
so.
dynamic tension. Uh, Whereas now, I don't think that's the major issue. Like, I think there's just the complexity at the time was I feel like this all started during the Industrial Revolution. So you had, factories and workers being represented by the more labor movements, and then the factories themselves and the capitalists represented by like the liberals in Australia, sort of a thing. And that was the dynamic tension, but it was kind of the same all over the world. But we've kind of solved for factories, but we're still kind of using that as the basis. So like this versus that.
Well,
Whereas,
I have a good segue here because
oh, okay.
how will political parties then solve for AI? Will AI
Well,
agents
well,
get
wait,
their
wait, wait.
own
How many minutes?
political parties?
18 minutes before AI came in. Oh, I
Bam,
suppose we
there it
mentioned
is.
Claude before.
We did. We did.
Yeah,
And
explicit stuff.
on that point, interesting thing. So I followed Raffy's lead there and asked ChatGPT and Claude as to what it thinks about my political leanings. And that was interesting. And it was also interesting to give it one output from one LLM to the other. And the interesting part there is just how different AI models think about politics. So the first one I put it into was ChatGPT, and it gave a very happy, answer about oh, I can't really tell too much, but it gave, some nice talking points and things to say that, oh, look, you're, what did it say? What are some of the things? You like a pragmatic, evidence-led approach to politics. You like to stay away from the tribal theater. Every single adjective is flattering, and you're a thoughtful technocratic centrist. So I was like, all right, interesting. So I took that and then put it into Claude as another different language model. And it then said, yes, this is a simplification that language models tend to default to. So the first thing, it was like, the thoughtful technocratic centrist. That's what most AI models will say for anybody who's professional and doesn't talk much about politics. Also, it's just using a lot of flattering stuff to make you feel good. And then the other interesting thing was it said, oh, you're a pragmatic, evidence led person. Well, what it said is that is a political stance in its own. It's not above politics, but that is just a political stance as well. So I was like, one, slightly deeper analysis. But two, it's also interesting to see how different language models would think about politics because I suspect there'll be more and more of this being involved in politics, which is already very
So
involved
like,
anyway.
I did this ages ago on ChatGPT when I was still using it, and then I've moved over to Claude not that long ago in Gemini. So I remember that I have historically always thought of myself as fairly left leaning, but the ChatGPT version was like actually it it said centrist, but it kind of gave some good justifications. And I was like, huh, I never thought of myself as centrist, but the arguments made sense to me because it was like, yeah, look, you care about social causes, but the the version of it that you want is like a sustainable one. It's not like just, hey, take from the rich and distribute. It's kind of like, hey, what's a funding model that's balanced? Like, can you have like a social enterprise that spins off stuff and supports the community? I was like, yeah, that is genuinely how I'd want to structure stuff instead of it just being like true philanthropy, like I'm just donating stuff because it requires someone to have the like it's just too external dependent. I would rather set up like a company or like a like that is genuinely how I'd want to run it. So I was like, okay,
Mm,
maybe that's that. But then, then we put it through I put it through Claude as well just earlier. And so I basically said it's like so it tried to bunch it up and give me like on the Australian context you're probably this and you're a never voter here. I was like no, ignore all that, just make up a hypothetical company like a country with a hypothetical political structure, like how do you think I would vote? And I did the same thing and I'll just go to the challenge part because like it made up a bunch of parties which the not libertarian, like not this, not whatever, right? Not populist. Okay, so and single label best fit is liberal communitarian, or in a fictional party system, center reform, uh, modern center. I don't know what that means. So I was like, all right, what does that mean? So in the challenge things, it says like your stated political identity, if pushed, would probably be centrist, evidence based, beyond left and right, kind of like yeah. But then, but then it goes. That's the standard self description of educated professionals everywhere, and it's almost always mild center right position dressed up as neutrality. And I'm like, oh, okay, I thought I was mild left, but sure, whatever. The I'm above tribe stance itself is a tribe, just like you. And historically, it's the tribe of people whose interests are already well served by the existing settlement. And I was like, oh, that's you know, because I was like, yeah, genuinely speaking, because you're kind of we'd both say it's like there was a system, you kind of learn the system and you know how to play the game within the system. So
mm.
then you're like,
And you're like,
yeah,
man, the system's all right. But
yeah,
is
like,
it?
and as we're recording this, like Australia's about to announce some big tax reforms, and just before this, we were like chatting about it, going, "Oh man, like you got to like on this thing." I was like, "Oh, it's on point." Like, I'm like, I
Mm,
think it. I don't know what the changes are going to be, but there's going to be changes, and I was like, "Oh man, having to learn whatever the new crap thing is, like
a
how
new
they're going to
game.
do stuff." Like, it's like, how can we just keep it as it is? Like that is the unconscious bias. So like, Claude, like well done, like picking that. Like, yeah. Then Claude's challenge to me is like worth interrogating. Which actual policies would you sacrifice personal financial position for? If the honest answer is very few, then your politics are more conservative than your self image suggests, regardless of how the values list reads. And I was like, oh, this is where I disagree with Claude. I would actually vote against my self interest, and I have done so many times. So,
Mm,
yeah. So, like, yeah, like that bit, I think the challenge, like, it's fine. Like, I'm for redistribution and making society a little
yeah,
bit more flatter than polarized, because I think there is
that
another
sounds like
thing,
a
which is
very
like,
technocratic, centrist
no,
view. I think I don't know what that means.
no, technocratic is like basically just saying, hey, there's a bunch of like the technocrats, like, learn people who just get to make all the rules instead of like one major figure. It's kind of like closer to oligarchy than not. I don't
Mm,
particularly agree with that because you give up too much representative rights. But I think the thing that it all misses is like it's not so much personal gain versus like societal gain, because it's like if you index too much on personal, right? Like let's just say you are like the first trillionaire, da da da, right? Like the pie does get bigger. That's the main point of capitalism and economy. You grow the pie so that everyone gets like might get a thinner slice, but the actual surface area is bigger. So like overall, everyone's better. But there is a rate of change dependent things, whereas you can like get too much of the pie because you just grew too quickly because the percentage points assigned to you is just too large, right? It's like
mm,
the growth difference between like 7% and like 15%. It's not actually double. It's like compounds way more over a very short period of time. So I think at a certain point, it's you become extractive if it's too personal based. And if that happens and society doesn't get to redistribute over time, it'll level itself out over time, of course. But what happens is that uh, if you have a very unequal society, you as the individual with the means have to spend so much on like be it healthcare or personal safety and whatnot, right? Because society is out to get you because you have stuff they don't. Like
Mm,
violence or theft becomes more appealing. So I don't like at a certain point you have to go, it's like actually if I just pay a bit more taxes, everyone's better off and I just have to spend less on this stuff. Like self-serving, you would want to redistribute, right? Like you would just have like if you go for a walk, you wouldn't have to have your own secluded garden because that's the only place that's safe. You could just go to any garden. Like, sure, it wouldn't be as nice as your private secluded garden, but you'd have the variety, right? Like that trade off happens, and I think the more in a bubble, in your own bubble, you become if you're one of the
mm.
elites. Like the more you push towards, like, oh, like they just don't understand. Will like don't they see I'm trying to do this? And the other version is like, yeah, cool, but it's because they don't have the means. Like they're getting to survival mode, right? So that's why they're just trying to survive. So like, you might be trying to do great stuff, but they're trying to put like a roof over their heads and put
Yeah,
food on the table. So like, what else are they meant to do? Like if that's where the division comes. So I would all be for like, yeah, distribute because as long as it's done efficiently, it's actually net easier for everyone involved. It's just that's the bit that's hard is like, what is a good
I was
safety
going to
net?
say the hard thing is also what is a good way of doing it because everybody has their my way is the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And which just comes back to politics because it's like eventually it comes to you group and the current system actually requires just to talk about the current landscapes like most countries have ended up in like Australia, UK, US have ended up in like a system where there's like a major ruling party that gets like 51% of the votes and a minor party gets like 49 and then they argue back and forth, right? And apart from say like there's unique party places like China for example, but the interesting thing is like in modern day politics if you have a party that gets a landslide win it's actually terrible because then they do stupid policies that doesn't get stress tested because they can just do things and pass things and no one really gets to stop them. Whereas if like the modern day thing requires an effective opposition because that's like the checks and balances. Because but at the same time it means that whatever you're doing flip flops quite a lot. It's like some party will announce this, the next person will come into power and cancel that. And it's like inefficient because it just kind of zigzags. But you generally end up with a better representation of like both sides. Like, if you're more left leaning or right leaning, you get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and but it's just a less efficient form of doing things. And then you look at like top down structures like China, where it's like the government sets the policy and that's that. Like, but
That's the
they have such
interesting
a
thing of then moving fast versus moving carefully, I guess.
yeah. Well, I mean, actually, the
Like
uni
checks and
parties
balances, I
move
guess. Checks
faster.
and balances, I guess. Yeah, that's what I mean.
It
So checks and
yeah.
balances slow you down, but maybe potentially results in less problems. And I think that's something that kind of keeps changing and being tested over time.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the right answer is because because it gets framed as democracy represents the people, because you're electing people, etc. But like, you basically have to pick your brand of ice cream and say that represents me more than any other thing. It's like, yes, pistachio ice
Mm-mm.
cream, but you don't get to choose not ice cream. Right? What if your favorite dessert's a cake, but you're forced to
It's unfortunate.
choose yeah, right. Like, so I kind of see like democratically elected things are a good proxy, but it's always a proxy. It doesn't really, it will never 100% reflect you as a person. Whereas if you look at the China model, and I'm sure there's others, I just looked into China a little while ago, their political system is like tens of thousands of people. So like whilst it's uni party, it kind of like population based is like a number of people to a person ratio, and then it feeds in. Like you don't get to disagree with the top, but you get in to feed into like the top. So and the top can still like override anything you do. So it's not as balanced. But I wonder like because it's a numbers to a person ratio and it climbs the pyramid like whether it's a bit more representative or it's not
Mm.
actually any different to what like a democratically elected thing is. Like I don't know because I haven't been in that system and I don't think I'd like it. But
Well, an
but I was
interesting
like,
one
yeah, it's
actually
probably not
is,
as different as what I think it is.
yeah, so the San Blas in Panama is where it was recently. And that's another region. And it's interesting because it's these 300 islands and they're actually self governed. So they're still officially part of Panama and they're Panamanian citizens. But for that whole region, the indigenous population basically looks after itself, and they create their own laws as well. And the way it works is there's about 50 of these sort of local chiefs, who then there's also another level, and then one person who represents all of it. And the interesting thing is, so they sort of fought for independence kind of thing initially, and what they got with the US's help back in 1925 is, or 38 or something, but is not independence and autonomous government in the region. So
Mm.
again, they have that kind of structure of the local chiefs and the different levels, but they get to control their own thing. So they act as almost like their own country in a sense, where they get to set up their rules. Um, and yeah, so one of the interesting things there, and it's about like only like 30,000 people, but it's different. They keep the language, they keep their own land. So there's not a lot of, development and stuff happening there because they have like a maternal passing down of the islands and the land, and they really do stick to that. Um, so again, another different form of government. So that local chief would be the one who governs that island. Um, we got to know about this when went to one of the islands, and technically not supposed to fly drones apparently. So yeah, we got to meet the local congressor. So imagine, you get to sit in a room with a bunch of like five other people and be like, oh, no drone flying. Anyway, uh, rules there are also very interesting because I guess it's the same as everywhere, where the rules are also kind of questionable as to like how sticky they are and how negotiable rules are. That'll be a story for another
Well,
day.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like the entire thing with politics that I found so fascinating is that these are totally arbitrary, non rules of physics, easily breakable things that just because of the layers and
Mm-mm.
how long they've been, we just kind of go, but that's the law. And you're like, yeah, a bunch of people were like, this guy's flying a drone. We don't like it. What should we do? It's like any
Yeah,
bird like object cannot hover above, like,
yeah.
let's make it
I was like,
general so
I
that it
was very
applies
far
to.
away. It's like, all right, here. It's like mistake. Didn't know, deleted everything. And they started off with, oh no, it's going to be like a $50 fine. And I was like, I saw you have petrol and I need petrol. How about I'll buy some petrol and give you $15. I'll buy $15 worth of petrol and not pay a fine. Got them down. Eventually got to buy $15 of petrol and pay a $15 fine. Sure. Like, what are you going to do at the end of the day? So, you
I just
know,
love it. It's like I know I'm in trouble, but I'm brown. Like I see your law and you're fine, and I go haggle mode hat on. It's like
damn straight. I'm not paying full price. Come on.
it's like why would I pay the fine at sticker price?
Please. Please. What, what
But
kind of
that's
crazy talk is this?
I actually, on that note, because I was like, I thought we should talk about the current climate, but we've already kind of half done that with this sort of more populism sort of stuff rising. But what I found interesting, and I didn't know this at the time, so political systems obviously change, right? So, like, usually when one side wins and the other is like, oh my God, historic thing. But if you look at the margins, right, and it was like, oh, this was a landslide win, right? Like when you hear the words landslide win, what do you expect? Like, what sort of percentage do you think someone
I'd
won
be
by?
like, 80% of the votes must have gone to them.
Yeah,
And like.
right. Landslides like 5 to 10. Like you're not 51, you're 55 to 60. Like,
Whoa.
and like there was there's a guy called Balaji Srinivasan who's like, you want to look at technocracy, like he's like the guy who promotes this more than anything else. But he did have
Mm,
an interesting point, which is like current modern day stuff. You're trying to go for the 51% win, right? So it just means that by like, if you get to 51, you get to establish the rules, but the 49 other percent don't agree with you, right? So it's
mm.
like a lot of the population is not unhappy. It's like, should we raise the threshold to like 75%? So like most people are happy. Like, yeah, that's an interesting point. Um, but I think what's happening is that if you look at, say, the EU countries, they have a lot of independence because essentially, if you like, maybe they're just a few more steps ahead or whatnot. It's like a coalition forms because no major party wins enough of the votes. So they have to then go, well, it might be like the weed party and the thing party, and then and the Liberal Party, whatever, right? And they come together and they become Amsterdam, where weed is legal, and this is also a thing. So it's in a way good
Well, that's
because I think it
interesting.
represents more of the
That
yeah.
sounds good and bad because you're like, all right, I voted for this party, but now somebody else is in power, and none of that party's things that I was interested in are being enacted.
Well, the thing becomes that after you vote, then it gets into the second round of voting where then the parties
Yeah.
have to then form coalitions. So it is
Mm.
way slower, and and then parties will then go, no, I don't want to be part of the coalition anymore, and then they leave, and then they have to have re-elections. So it's like it's a messier,
It sounds like
but
where they
you
go
could
to have some lunch and stop for smoko, and then
Yeah, like it's kind of like it's messier, but it's probably more
mm,
representative of the people. But it's messier, and
interesting.
it seems to like fall into dysfunction more often. And the Australian version of this recently was the coalition. So the Liberals and the Nationals formed a coalition to oppose Labor because Labor has
Mm,
way more votes. So two parties had to come together and they vote as a bloc, right? And they kind of for like a couple of weeks split apart and then they made up again. But the political fallout for that is everyone kind of looks at it going, man, you guys can't even manage your own alliance. Like, how can you manage a country? So they've
mm,
like the one nation winning that seat was
mm,
like at the expense mainly of the coalition because there was a seat that they've held for 70 something years. They've never lost it in
mm.
72 or 77 years. And it doesn't
Wow.
go to the current party in power. So this is kind of says like, oh, people are also unhappy in how this is going. It goes to like a populist slash protest vote party. Like, it
Mm,
kind of reflects that, this sort of more
people are
fragmenting
unhappy.
of, yeah. So it's interesting. But years and years ago, I was in Iceland and I was just walking past and like, I was like, just exploring Reykjavik. And I was like, what is that noise? I was walking through the city center and there was like this tiny little park and there was all these people like banging pots and pans. And I was like, must be some Icelandic tradition. Like, I don't know. I like
Let me get
walked
a
around
pan.
and I was like, yeah, like, is this some sort of, because I heard that in Iceland, a lot of people play musical instruments. I'm like, this is terrible. But I wonder if this is like, I don't know, the Icelandic marching band practice. So like, it's like, this is the before
Shouldn't
and
be
we're going
rude.
to do an after shoot.
Don't.
Like
Yeah, yeah. Don't be rude to the locals.
I stood around for a bit and everyone was like looking at me funny. And then I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to go explore something else. Pots and pans, great, done. And a few
Well
years
done.
later, I
Carry
went
on.
back and I was like walking around and then I was like, what the? There was these statues of people banging pots and pans. And I'm like, I was there
Hmm,
for that. What the hell was this?
band
Why is there
practice.
a statue? Like, was this like some famous band, like the Icelandic kitchen band? Like, I'm
Yeah.
reading the plaque, right? So it turns out throughout that time, so this is around 2008, 2009, like the global financial crisis, right? So Iceland had like its politicians and whatnot, and the prime minister or president of the day did some dodgy stuff. Like basically, he cross-lateralized, like he basically took over, like installed his friends into both banks that they have, right? And S&P basically saw that and were like, oh, so this is not a very legit country if it's doing that. So like
Yeah.
basically dropped their credit ranking, right? So
Ah,
from like A
right.
plus to like B or C or well, like I don't know, like something like that happened, and so their borrowing costs went up overnight. Like the country just went into recession because their interest
That's
requirements just like
unfortunate.
skyrocketed. This like the very probably not accurate version of events as far as I recall. So actual history might be totally different, but some version of that happened. And then like rest of Europe, they were like austerity measures, population, we have to cut back. And then the population of Iceland kind of went, you effed up, not us.
Uh,
You did the fucking around and finding out. So why do we? Yeah, yeah. So that was supposedly the population, like grandmas and stuff, banging pots, and that was like the prime minister's house, going, "Oi, no, you're at fault." So so
they
they
just stood
basically chucked
outside
the guy.
banging pots and pans, I
So like
believe
it
that.
was called the Pots and Pans Revolution, and I was like, "Oh right." No wonder they're looking at me funny. It's like, who's this guy? Like we're trying to overthrow the government, and there's this guy
Yeah.
like, like I
He's
didn't know.
dancing along, taking.
Right? So they chuck the guy in jail, right? And then like, oh, well, clearly the rules don't work because politicians are corrupt. How are we going to fix this, right? And at the time, Facebook was relatively new. So they made a Facebook page and they wrote their constitution on Facebook as a note, as a community.
Cool. All right.
That
Why
was the
not?
beginning.
Well done.
Yeah, but I was like, so political systems, because they are just invented stories and invented lines that we've made for ourselves,
You
you
can
can't actually
reinvent
change
them
them.
on Facebook anytime.
Like, I don't know if that was the final version, but I remember at the time, like, because then, like, the next time, I think I was like, it came up on my news because I went like for a few years, I was going like almost every year. So then I was reading the newspaper, and they're like, oh yeah, Facebook notes for thing. This is the new Iceland coming of age, and I was like, all right. So this was like way more intense than I thought it was. It wasn't a marching band
Huh,
at all. Um,
huh.
uh, anyway, yeah. So, dear listeners, do you like? What's your views on politics? I would love to know. So please do leave us a voice note or
Yeah.
send us a message, and also like and subscribe and all that stuff. And I thought, to end it all, I would sign off on a few little random tidbits. So, Chandra, why don't you begin with yours because mine's a bit more political. So I think it fits with the
Sure.
theme.
You didn't still do it.
So like, oh, look, I just asked, so 36 cents, you didn't inflation adjust it, a whopping $6.74 in 2026 dollars.
Okay.
Okay.
But
So,
inflation adjusted.
sorry, how much is it going to cost for your vote roughly?
Up
it's,
there.
it's pretty cold down there.
I'm out. I'm
Um,
out.
but like you look at like because I saw the video of like how the Panama Canal operates. Like it is a
Mm,
massive amount of water that they're shifting around to get like like as
yeah,
in
it
like
is.
like I'm sure there's a profit margin, but I'm like there's also just like the engine like they look because it's
Mm,
all salt water, right? And the series of like they're all moving parts in salt water and pumping like tens of thousands of liters of water to get these things across. And I was like, you know what? Like I don't think their operating costs are cheap. Like there probably is like
well,
a decent amount of that is
interestingly,
like operating costs. Well, I mean, I'm sure there's maintenance stuff, right? Like moving parts in salt water usually require maintenance sort of stuff. But anyway, that's
yes,
anyway getting
anything
away
in
from like
salt
swimming in
water
the pan.
will slowly die. Trust me, I know. It's a matter of
My one is a little bit more political. So years and years ago, I used to work for CareFlight, which is now Life Flight. So fly around in helicopters and Royal Flying Doctors and stuff. And one day we landed at 3 o'clock in the morning, hit a kangaroo. The propeller got bent, so I got stuck in a town called Barcaldine in the middle of Queensland. Like probably as smack bang to the middle of this state as you can get, and is like one of the largest states in Australia. Anyway, after all the medical stuff got done, we had to stay the night, and then another plane was going to come pick us up in a few hours. So we're like, oh, let's get out for breakfast. We're walking around, and this is like a town that has 3 streets, right? Like literally 3 streets. They're just dirt streets. There's no paving. So there's like what you'd expect, like an old Queenslander style bungalow, like wooden houses on stilts, just sort of a thing. And another one a little file away. And then we turn the corner and there's like a country pub. Every single country town has one. And then across the road from that is this weirdly geometric cube thing that looks totally like some sci-fi structure. And I'm like, what the hell is that? It is like,
mm,
one of these things don't belong, and it's that,
yeah,
right? So I go
something's not
there,
quite right.
and it turns around. If you turn around on the corner, there was 2 pubs. So it's like it's obviously an up and coming town
Huh.
of like 5 people.
The hipsters are
And there's
moving
like
in.
so
Careful.
there's this giant cubic structure in front of a train station, and we get there, and there's like this sign, and it's like the Tree of Knowledge, and I was like, what the hell is this, right? So it turns out. Um, the Tree of Knowledge was this old gum tree, um, and they've got this, and that was where years and years before, in like 1920s or 30, probably around the time someone was swimming the Panama Canal, because it used to be an old, like cattle slash sheep shearing sort of a area. So lots of cattle would get sold there and whatnot. A lot of the workers would meet underneath this gum tree near the train station, and that's where they decided to unionize. So that was the birthplace of the fable is that that's the birthplace of the Australian labor movement, where like unions formed and like that as a labor party to represent the workers started underneath the Tree of Knowledge. And around the time,
Hmm.
so what had happened was around the time, this is like 2016ish, the Liberal government, like the opposing government, was in power. So like the year prior, they found that someone had poisoned the tree, so the tree died. Um, so the like some of the branches had fallen off and all that stuff. So they kept like the the dead trunk, and I was like, oh, like because the opposition won, so haha, Labor died, sort of a thing. They'd taken all the dead limbs and chopped it up, and they made like this installation. It actually looks pretty cool. So it's like if you have the tree, imagine where the branches go. They're kind of, instead of the branches being up, they hung the branches as like it's very hard to describe. It's almost like a chandelier of sorts, but a wooden one. So wood coming from the top, like it's a cube, right? With these wooden sort of rectangular logs coming off, making like a, but they're at different heights. So imagine like a hollowing out of a 3D thing where it looks like if you stood there, you'd see the tree trunk, but the irregular shape of the logs being at different lengths hanging down form like what the tree's outline would have been. It's a pretty cool sculpture. I can't really describe it any more than that. But if you guys are interested, just look up Tree of Life, Tree of Knowledge,
Yeah.
Bark Holden, and you'll see it. It's yeah, it's like a random tidbit. And had I not been deployed on this mission, and had we not hit a kangaroo on landing, and had we not been picked up by a plane that was coming back from Mount Isa like hours later, I would never have seen it. So and it just happened to be the birthplace of the Australian labor movement. So I was like, that's as
No.
randint as it gets. And on that note, that's it for this episode. So, how did you like us getting political? Do you agree, disagree? We are probably very wrong on a lot of like our descriptions of stuff. So, if you have better ways of explaining our version of things, please do let us know, either on social media or by messaging or leaving a voice note. And until next time, that's it for this episode. Bye bye.